Okay, so we will get into looking at intermediate Google Sheets. And I'll share my screen with you. So the first thing I want to go over, so we have this chart of data on the weather tab. And last week we talked about how we can insert a row by either right-clicking or going to the Insert menu. I'm going to insert a row above because I want a headline or a title, so I'm going to type my title in here. And I can see I typed it in this first cell, but I want it to kind of go across all of these cells. So I can highlight multiple cells, and up here on the menu bar, this icon is the merge cells icon, and it's got like the two arrows kind of pointing together. And when I click on that, what it'll do is it'll take the cells I had highlighted and merge them together. So now this is one cell that's going across all of my data. Then I want to create a chart of my data. I want to graph this data. So there's a couple different ways that you can easily create a chart. What I usually do is I will highlight the data that I want to graph. So let's say I just want to graph, Sheboygan's high temperatures first. So I'm going to highlight just the, column A and B data here. And then there is a shortcut up here on the menu bar towards the end on the right. This little bar graph icon is your Insert Chart. So when you click on that, it's going to put a chart in your spreadsheet, and it's going to kind of predict what type of graph you want. You can move this chart around and resize it. You also have this menu that appears on the side, and this would allow you to change the type of graph or chart. So right now it's a line chart. Maybe I wanted it to be more of a bar graph. So I can decide. Under the Customize tab, this is where you can change color. If you wanted to change the color of the line under Series, I can make this a different color line. I can change the thickness if I wanted to see the individual data points under point size. So now you see that I have these actual circles to make it clear what data points I'm using. Under that series, I also have the ability to add data labels. So this would add the actual numeric value. If I wanted to change any of the titles or labels, so right now it says Sheboygan versus day, I could just click in that title box and maybe change this to Sheboygan high temperature. And I could do the same thing with any of the axes. Once I have this chart, if I click off of it and I need to go back in and change anything, I can click the three dots. And if I click on Edit Chart, that's just going to open up that side menu again for me. I also have the ability to download this chart as an image. So if I made a chart and I wanted to save it as an image file somewhere to use in a presentation or to share, I can download that as either a PDF or an image file. So I just did the Sheboygan data here, but I can also select multiple data columns here. And now if I go back to that insert chart option, now it's recognizing that I have 2 series, and it graphed both of those as well. The one other thing that I wanted to show with this set of data is how we can find the average using a formula. So if I wanted to add at the end here something with the average temp, last week I showed how we could use this functions button up here in the menu bar to find the sum of data. But one of the other options here is average. So I could click on this functions, this little E looking icon, and click average, and then select the cells that I want to find the average of, and hit enter. So now it's giving me an average of all of the Sheboygan high temperatures for the last week. Now I don't like this decimal point. Maybe I only want to round it to the nearest tenth or something. I can change how the number displays by clicking on the cell, going up to Format, and then hovering over Number. And here's where I have different options. So right now, it's just kind of automatically thinking of what I'm trying to do. But maybe I want to round it to, here, this would be rounding it to the 100th. I could go back there if I only wanted it. I could go, here's a whole number with no decimal points. So I can choose how that displays. If you're working with money, it usually will recognize, dollars, but you can change it if you need to, or if you're working with dates. Those are all different number formats. Now I had changed the font and made this bigger, but you'll know when I added the new data, it's still the original small text. If I wanted to copy the formatting, so I could copy the data by doing a copy or Control or Command C, but I want to copy the formatting, so I want the size and the temp or the font to be the same down here. There's a shortcut for this. What I can do is I can click in a cell that has the formatting I want, and up here on the menu bar, on the left-hand side is a paintbrush icon. If I click that, it's going to copy that formatting, and then I can highlight the cells I want to apply that formatting to. So I'm clicking and dragging, and when I let go, it changed those cells to match the formatting of the cell I had originally clicked in. So I might have to adjust the width of my column here. And it reverted back to that decimal because I hadn't changed the format of the Friday row. Now, if I wanted to find the Fort Worth average temperature, I could repeat that same process, by going to the functions, going average, selecting the cells. But I already have the formula written here in the Sheboygan column. You can drag formulas and apply them to other columns. So when I click on this cell that has the average Sheboygan temperature for the last week, I get this little blue square in the bottom right corner. And when I hover my mouse over it, I get a little cross. If I click and I drag over one cell, it's going to now apply that formula to the new column. So you'll notice that the temperatures are different. So even though I drag the same formula over, if I click in this cell, it's finding the average of B3 to B9 up here in the function. And if I click in cell C10, it's finding the average of the cells in C. So that's just a quick way to, if you have a formula in one cell, to kind of apply that formula to other cells. I'm going to pause there for a moment to see if there's any questions on any of these before we move on to the next tab. Okay, then I'm going to move on to the t-shirt orders tab. And can you copy format for cells that aren't adjacent? If you're using the paintbrush, like the paint formatting to get the size and font and text, it doesn't have to be adjacent. You can apply it anywhere. If you're using this little drag option, it would have to be either next to it or down. There are some fancier paste options. That would be kind of a advanced series of, you can copy and then paste different ways if the cells aren't adjacent. So yeah, looking at the t-shirt order, last time we had just briefly touched on finding the sum. And again, that was from that functions shortcut. And I can find the sum, and I can highlight what cells I want to find the sum of. Or now, as I showed you before in the last tab, I have the sum for this column. I could click that little square and drag it over as well. I can do the same thing besides doing columns. I can also do the same thing for a row of data. And then instead of having to repeat that for every row, I'm just going to put it in the first one, get that little crosshairs, and drag down. So now I have the sum of each row. So those are some shortcuts if you're working with the data, that you don't have to actually really build the formula yourself. But sometimes you might need to kind of enter your own formula. And in Sheets, all formulas are always starting with an equal sign. So up here in this like function line or in the cell, I'm going to start typing equals. And then in this case, I want to just find out if each t-shirt is $15. I want it to calculate for me how much each student owes. So I'm going to tell it, I'm going to want it just to do a basic calculation. So I type the equal sign to tell it that I'm doing a formula. I'm going to click in cell H2, and then I'm going to put in the multiplication sign and just the number 15. So that formula, the equals H2, cell H2 times the number 15, is telling me, okay, based on how many t-shirts each student ordered, and each shirt is $15, how much is the total cost? So now I did that for the first row, and I'm going to just take this little blue square and drag it down so that I get a total for each row. Now again, I want to format this number because these are dollars. So I have those cells highlighted. I'm going to go up to the menu, go to Format Number, and then I just want a currency, and I'll just do a rounded one so I don't have any decimal points, and it's going to automatically apply that $sign for me. What's nice is when you're using formulas like this, if any of the data changes, this number is going to change. So let's say Sally ends up ordering 2 more shirts. If I entered a 2 in Sally's row, this formula automatically updated because it's the sum formula of all of these cells. And then the total cost also updated because it is a formula based on the number of shirts ordered. So I don't have to recalculate everything anytime any of this data changes. So you can use the formulas, equals, and you can do any calculation. So, I mean, if you wanted to do, the total cost, and then they get a $10 discount. I could do, equals the cell name, which is I2. It's always the column and then the row. And then I can use any operation, add, subtract, multiply, divide. So I'm just going to, a $10 discount. Any questions on using, the sum or putting in a calculation formula? Then, with the time we have left, I'm going to move on to the Sign Up tab. So in this example, we have students that are registering for different sessions and their responses, and I want to start grouping these and using this data. So there's a couple different ways that I can kind of organize and view this data. So one way is a filter. And up here on the menu bar, we looked at the chart and then the functions. But in between those is this little kind of funnel, which is a filter. Now, if I click on that filter, it kind of highlights my data. And if I click the little kind of lines in the corner of one of the top cells, right now it's showing any responses. But let's say I only wanted to see who responded to session 1. I could click just session 1 and uncheck all of the other ones. And it's going to hide all of my other data. So I'm only seeing those people that said session 1. Now, if I wanted to switch that, I would click the little funnel icon, and maybe I want to see session 2. So this is one way that you can kind of look at individual data. However, word of caution when you're using filters is that this changes the view for everybody that's shared on the spreadsheet. So if you're working with multiple people on the same spreadsheet, if you create a filter, when somebody else goes into that spreadsheet, they're going to only see the data that you've kind of filtered out at that time. So just be aware of that, because it has created issues in the past where, somebody filters out data and then, they're looking and they're like, well, I'm missing row 8, 9, 10, like what's going on? Because somebody else comes in and doesn't know or doesn't recognize that it's being filtered. So besides the filter, there are some other options that you can do. So I clicked the funnel icon to create the filter. but there is a little drop down next to that up in here in the menu bar, which is a filtered view. And if I create a new filtered view, you'll notice it looks kind of the same here where we have the lines, but I have this big kind of black border around it. And it works the same way, but when I'm in a filter view, that's just a snapshot for me. So it's only changing the way I look at the data. It's not changing it for everybody that's shared on the spreadsheet right now. So if I just wanted a quick, I only want to see session 2, again, if somebody else was in this is more of a temporary view. And as soon as I click the X to exit out of the filter view, it's going to take me back to my full data source. So if you are going to use filters, I usually recommend doing this little drop down here and creating a new filter view so that you're less likely to kind of mess with somebody else's view. Again, it's more temporary, that you're not going to lose data as easily. Not that the data disappears in a regular one, but. So that's filter and filter view. Other things that you can do with data like this, let's say I wanted to be able to count how many people are signed up for each session, because I have a limit. I could sit here and I could count by hand, but then if somebody changes, I want it to change. So I could manually create some formulas if I wanted to, but I'm going to show you a shortcut. Down here at the bottom, there's a little kind of star diamond looking icon, and that's the Explore feature. If you click on that, it's going to open up a side panel over here. And Google came out with this a couple of years ago, and it gives some AI predictions of what you might be looking for with this data. So in this case, I wanted to have a count of each session and how many people were registered. So I can see here that they actually are giving me a preview of, counts of each session. So I could look at that, or if I click this little plus button here, I could actually insert that table right into my document. And it created all of the formulas that I need already for me, where you could manually build the formulas to do this, but you don't need to. Now what's nice, so this is in a different separate tab here, but if I go back to my sign up tab, and let's say, this student changed to session 1, so right now I had 12 in session 2 and 4 in session 1, but I want to even those sessions off, so maybe Bob here is now going to be attending session 1, so I'm going to change that. And if I look at my table, again, because I set this up as a formula, it automatically updated those counts. So I don't even need to recount anything. And I'm always going to have the most accurate updated count because I'm using those formulas.
Jenny, if you wanted to, could you get the pivot table so it was on this sheet, or does it have to go into a different tab?
Yeah. So when I clicked that Explore button and I went to insert it, it asked me if I wanted to insert it in a new sheet or an existing sheet. I could have clicked on the existing sheet and I could have typed in, sign up or actually I could have selected like where I wanted to put it. So I could have said, okay, I want to put it right here, and it would have. And now, if I create it, it put it on that sheet. So I just where I had selected it when I inserted it. If I was creating something like this on my own, and I typed in session 1 here, because I'm going to, kind of build this chart. One other thing, I showed this, how you could drag down the formulas. If you're working with numbers or dates, if you do the same thing, if you get that little square in the corner with the crosshairs and you drag it down, it's going to think you're doing a series. So you'll notice I typed in session 1 here, and when I dragged it down, it started doing 2, 3, and if I, were to keep going, it would build from there. Same thing with dates. So if I did, 7/14, and then I, drag this down, it's just going to keep going sequentially. So it's a kind of a quick way if you're doing a list of numbers or a list of dates, instead of having to do 1, 2, 3, you don't have to keep entering each one. So there was one more formula I was going to show, but I want to be conscious of everyone's time, so I will pause for questions. I know there was one about making it...
Clarifying question about when you're making that filter for yourself to view it, can you just run through that filter option where it goes black around the edges?
Sure. So the icon for filtering is the funnel up here next to the functions. But to create that temporary view, you need to click the little triangle drop down next to that icon. That's create a new filtered view. And then that's when I get that, kind of black border. So that's telling me that I'm in a filtered view. And actually, because I added all this other stuff, I'm going to highlight the columns I want to work with here. So anytime you see these like kind of lines that are the longer and then they get shorter, that's filtering options. So now I can click there, and then this is where I can select. I can either select all, I can clear, and only select, which, if I only want to see sessions 1 and 3. And then anytime I change what I have selected, it's going to change my view. And when I'm done, I can just close that filter view. So like I said, it is 10:30. I was going to show one more formula, which is a query formula, which we use actually quite a bit. It's probably one of the most widely used formulas that I use, and it helps you kind of break up data into groups based on sessions like this. So you're welcome. I will walk through it. If you need to leave or you're not interested, feel free to drop off now. But otherwise, I will just quickly go through how you can create a query to separate out that data. So a query is going to be similar to a filter, but you can create it. A lot of times we create it in a new tab. So I have this sign-up sheet, but I want to now have separate tabs for each session. So I can just quickly look at everybody who's registered for a session. So I'm going to add a new sheet. And in the first cell, I'm going to always start with my equal sign. And now in this case, I'm going to type in the word query, because that's the type of formula that I want. And let me before I do that, I can zoom in here a little bit. And you'll see that, okay, it's got an error message. So anytime you're working with formulas, if you see something like this, that's an error message. So I started typing in equals and then query, and it'll start populating. So, yep, I want a query formula. And when you're first starting out with formulas and sheets, and even if you're like me that have used them quite a bit, this little question mark, if I click on it, it will expand and kind of give you some guidance of what it's looking for. But the first thing you would do is you need to tell it what data you want to work with. So I'm going to go back to my sign up, and I'm going to highlight the cells in this spreadsheet that have my data. So and you'll notice that it automatically plugged in the name of the sheet for me and what cells. Then I'm going to type a comma. And then again, if I'm following along, the next thing is telling it what information I want to select. So I'm going to do quotation marks, type the word select. And if I want to select everything, all I need to do is just put the little like star asterisk multiplication sign. And that tells it I want all my columns. Now, if I just did this, it's going to just pull everything as is. But I want it only to be session 1. So I'm going to type the word in where. And then I'm going to type in B, because I'm going to look at column B. B equals, and then I need to use a single quote mark and tell it, okay, look for session 1. So I put that in single quotes because it's going to look for the text. And really, that's all I need for the formula. So I'm going to just hit enter. And now I'm only seeing the responses that are session 1. If I were to change this formula to session 2, it's going to change. And finally, I could do the same thing for session 3. But what a lot of times we'll do is we'll make, if this is session 3 now, all you need to do, instead of having to repeat this formula for every session, you could just duplicate. So we went over this last week, click the little drop down next to the name of the tab, duplicate it. And now all you need to do is in this formula, everything's set. I'm just going to change that 3 to a 2. And now rename this to session 2. And do the same thing. And make this session 1. So there's a lot more you can do with a query formula, but this is really just the basics. And once you have this kind of basic formula, you're able to just change the information in it. So what I like to do is, if I'm trying to write a query formula on something, I'll go find an existing one I have in a different spreadsheet and kind of paste that and use that as a way to start and then just change the data. Now, kind of like the filter, I have separate lists, but this way they're always there and I can just click on whatever session I want to see. And again, because it's set, if Johnny here switches to session 3, when I change it on that sign up tab, now Johnny will be listed in session 3. So it'll automatically update my information.